for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. While I know we are joining from all over the world for this online event, as a representative of CIIS, I want to acknowledge our debt and gratitude to the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original peoples and continual caretakers of the San Francisco Peninsula. CIIS's campus is located on the traditional unceded lands of the Ramaytush Ohlone, which they call Yelamu. This acknowledgement is just one very small step towards being in deeper connection and relationship with Indigenous tribes and organizations in our own community. And it doesn't begin to acknowledge all of the native lands, languages, and territories where you are right now or where you live and work every day. So I would like to invite you to take a moment right now to think about and acknowledge the land where you reside, and importantly, to commit to learn more about the Native communities near you and to support their work. We always recommend native-land.ca as a starting resource if you're just getting started. Now, let me first introduce our presenters, Drew and Thomas, and then we'll get right to their conversation. Drew Dellinger is an internationally known speaker, writer, poet, and teacher who has lectured and taught extensively across the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, and many other publications, and he is author of the award-winning poetry collection Love Letter to the Milky Way and the upcoming book, The Ecological King, Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision of interconnectedness as a new worldview for our time of crisis. Drew has lectured at numerous colleges and universities and has taught at Prescott College, Shoemaker College, Naropa University, Oakland, the Sophia Center, CIIS, and John F. Kennedy University, where he was associate professor and director of the program in social ecology. From 2020 to 2022, Drew was scholar in residence at the Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute at Stanford University. From 2022 to 2023, he served as advisor to the World House Project at Stanford, working closely with Dr. Claiborne Carson. Thomas Hübl is a renowned teacher, author, and international facilitator who works within the complexity of systems and cultural change, integrating the core insights of the great wisdom traditions and mysticism with the discoveries of science. Since the early 2000s, he has led large-scale events and courses on the healing of collective trauma. He is the author of Attuned, Practicing Interdependence to Heal Our Trauma and Our World, and Healing Collective Trauma. He has served as an advisor and guest faculty for universities and organizations, as a coach for CEOs and organizational leaders, and is currently a visiting scholar at the Weiss Institute at Harvard University. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Thomas and Drew.
All right, thanks, Alex. Thanks everyone at CIS for sponsoring this event. Thomas, how's it going? Good to see you.
Good to see you, Drew, and thank you, Alex, also. And I'm happy to be here with you, Drew.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is a thrill. So the topic today is healing and collective trauma and interdependence. And I've had a great time reading your book here, Attuned, Practicing Interdependence to Heal Our Trauma and Our World. I don't know if you can see I've got my blur on, but I want you all to be able to see my tabs. I want to make sure you can all see my tabs here. There's a lot of great ideas and wisdom in this book. And one of the things I appreciated most about it is that it's ambitious and it's a work of synthesis, and you're bringing a lot of streams together and a lot of your deep commitment and your study and your kind of commitment to self-cultivation and to thinking deeply about our world is apparent in every page of this book. And again, I say it's a work of synthesis, and one of the things I appreciate is how it integrates the mystical and the scientific. It integrates the personal and the collective, the cosmological and the humanitarian, the therapeutic and the visionary. And it does so in a way that's wise, that's compassionate, that's kind of commonsensical. I mean, I think it's very deep and erudite, but it's also, you know, kind of a common sense kind of wisdom that we can feel in our bones. And I think it's ultimately very hopeful, but it's not the kind of cheap or easy hope that comes from remaining in denial about our problems. It's the kind of deeper hope that we get when we confront the challenges head on and with courage and compassion for ourselves and others. And so I think it's hopeful in that earned sense. It's hopeful in that deepest sense of taking a real, mature, clear-eyed look at the significant challenges and crises of our time. So I think it's a really important book. I've got just some quick questions kind of before we delve really deeply into the content of the book. Some kind of shorter warm-up questions. You can answer these briefly, or you can, you know, go into as much depth as you like. But first, why did you feel moved to write the book?
First of all, thank you for that concise and precise reflection on the book. That's beautiful, you said, and lovely, lovely. Yeah, but after writing Healing Collective Trauma, I felt, first of all, I want to speak more about something that I practiced for a very long time, like 3 decades almost, like is that attunement process, like how in the healing work, in the healing of trauma, it needs a lot of attunement. And actually attunement is such a powerful aspect of any kind of trauma healing work. So I wanted to write that, and then I wanted to speak more about the whole spectrum of individual, ancestral, and collective trauma, and how the method that we developed over this period of time in different places around the world is actually like synthesizing the parts of us that need to heal in our individual self, but that there is ancestral and collective. It's not separate, but it's a kind of a spectrum. It's a kind of a fluidity, and so I thought it would be great to combine this and write the next book. And that's what I did.
Fantastic. And what's your intention or goal for the book? You know, what impact or influence do you hope it'll have eventually? And you know, it's been out for a little bit, so I imagine it's already having some significant impact. But what's your kind of intention and goal? What's your ultimate ideal for what would be the impact and the influence of the book?
Yeah, one is that everybody who is a facilitator, therapist, coach, everybody who works with clients, we all have to walk our talk. There's all the intellectual concepts and understanding are great, but what really transforms is how we embody what we teach, or the spaces we provide for other people to facilitate healing, in this presence, in this mutual presence. And also that that deep relational quality is really like a deep art. Attunement is a deep art, and I think it needs a lot of practice to be committed also to expand my own, uh, let's say, conscious universe. And if I'm committed to that process, life will always show me new edges. And if I'm courageous to go there, as you said, it's not a cheap hope. That's beautifully said. It's like an earned hope. And I'm very much with that individually, but also collectively. How as collectives we can do this work, and I'm fascinated by that process.
And I want to get into, there's lots of great ideas and juicy terms and terminology in the book. There's three terms in particular that I want to kind of delve into so that we can all be on the same page. And those terms are attunement, transparent communication, and collective trauma. There's also collective absencing, which I'm interested in as well. But let's kind of take these one at a time. But before we do that, I'm intrigued by something what you just said, and you touched on it, but I would like to probe a little bit deeper when you say that therapists, facilitators need to walk their talk. You know, and you mentioned embodiment, and you mentioned kind of being open to seeing what emerges. But I'd love to kind of delve into that a little. What does it mean? What does it look like? What are some examples? What does it mean for a facilitator or a therapist to walk their talk?
Yeah, first of all, I see healing as the process where the word, what we say, and what we live and what we do becomes congruent, the same thing, not two. Where we are hurt or traumatized, often what we say and what we do are two. But actually, the healing process unifies a flow in the nervous system, a flow in the body, a flow between the individual, the ancestors, and the collective or spirit, and all of the before. So that's one thing. The other thing is that as a facilitator, I need my nervous system to be fluid and open enough that I can tune in with different layers of my clients or my group's developmental levels, so that when somebody got hurt at age 2, that it's not only that I can talk with my client about what happened at that time, but my nervous system is actually able to match that level of my client's nervous system and meet it directly on a biological level, the attunement level, the interoception. And and there it creates the safety that's needed to let the nervous system or the body or the emotions detox the content that we could never process. So in a way, I'm often saying like healing is that we become the right environment that our clients never had, or that a collective, a group becomes the environment that the collective never had in order to heal and to detox either the trauma or the transgressions of the past for us to grow as collectives. And I think the invocation with the native land just before is a very important aspect of what do we need to become as collectives for us to become a healing process or an integration process on a bigger scale. And so I think that fluidity needs me every time there's a client interaction, every time there is a personal or any kind of difficulty or friction. It needs my own introspection so that I walk the transformation that I teach. And I think when we do that consistently, we continuously expand and grow, and everybody we work with will benefit from our growth. That's a little, I mean, there's so much more to say to that, but it's a kind of a
Sure.
concentrated answer.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, we're going to circle around, back to these ideas several times. So let's just jump right into the term attunement. It's obviously important in this book, as the book is called Attuned, right? So what do you mean by this term attunement? You've touched on it, but I'd love to hear a little bit more.
Yeah. So I often say the basic building block of relating is I feel you and I feel how you feel me. When we are in that mutual or even one-sided, it doesn't matter, attunement, with my nervous system is synchronizing with your nervous system, and that induces a better data flow. It's like a good internet connection makes this transmission fluid. If the internet connection is disturbed or cut, so we don't have any transmission now, so our conversation won't go out. Even if you have a great time, it doesn't transmit into the world. And so when whatever we carry inside, if it cannot be related to the world around us, people, environments, whatever, so the data connection is kind of shaky or broken. And so we pay a lot of attention how attunement can first be trained, can be professionalized, and can actually become a powerful tool of the craft or the art of healing. And that when we feel felt, we know that neuroscientifically we feel safer. So in order to create a safe relationship to start with an individual in an organization, as a leader, but also as in the collective, in groups, we need that sensing, or that I feel you feeling me, and that attention, a nervous system's attention, can be felt, and we create a bigger space together. And often we see, when we talk about wounds or trauma, the relationship cannot be, we can't stay usually in that kind of attuned process. So that indicates that something needs to be looked at instead of saying, oh, something is wrong. I should be all the time related. No, there is something we need to bring into our awareness and then re-relate slowly as we detox past material. And I think providing that attuned space, and then to go deeper and to, when we professionalize this with professionals, with therapists or so then we train that much deeper. So there's an application, as I write in the book. The first part of the book is for all of us, and the second part of the book is more directed towards professionals, so that we can refine that if we need to apply this every day in our work stream.
Fantastic. It reminds me of the guys who develop neurolinguistic programming, and one of the ways that they kind of created this system was by watching master therapists, watching brilliant therapists that like Virginia Satir, and kind of breaking down what they were doing and seeing how they matched, how they developed rapport with their clients and used, the sensory channels. If the person was saying, I feel like this, they wouldn't say, I hear you, or I see what you mean. They would say, they would use that kind of feeling language. You see what I'm saying? The language we use, how we hold our body, the rate at which we breathe, all of these, are seen as ways of establishing rapport. But it seems like the attunement that you're talking about is deeper than that, is more spiritual in a certain sense, or more, how would you speak to that distinction? Because I feel like you're talking about some of those things, some of those kind of basics of establishing rapport, but you're talking about something a little bit deeper as well. Is that right?
Exactly, beautifully said. Yes, I would completely agree. There are similar elements, of course, and there is, like, for example, when you imagine you hold a baby on your arm, and when you feel the baby, you can feel there's space. The time-space rhythm of your own nervous system changes. And when you speak, you modulate your voice. So there's time-space rhythm, a different modulation, a different pulsation. And you don't lose your grown-up perspective. You're still a grown-up, a parent, but your nervous system knows exactly how to attune to the baby, except that age level in your own nervous system is hurt. Then it will be harder to attune. And then we are a bit more insecure. We don't fully know, we don't fully feel, and we over mentalize parenting. But my nervous system, for hundreds of thousands of years, our nervous system knows how to attune as a parent. And so we take that process and then we say, okay, how to apply that with our clients. And then we pay attention to very fine, subtle, as you said, it's a bit more spiritual, very fine, subtle information that's being transmitted moment to moment to moment when we pay attention and when we by ourselves rest in an open, spacious presence state. Then there's actually a lot everybody transmits when we speak, or even when we don't speak, and that information is key, I believe, for healing. And then that we look at, and that's why I put this also in the context of a traumatized world, collective trauma, which we might speak a bit later about. That I believe my body completely knows the language of your body. Not only mine, our bodies. They know body-ish, like they know a language. And emotional language, my emotional system picks up on your emotions naturally. I can ask my client, oh, why, like, what are you feeling right now, as an intervention to trigger like self-perception. But it's not because I don't know. If I don't know, then I have to look at it. How come that my emotional system doesn't pick up on what's happening? So that we need to ask each other what we feel, I believe, is already part of a collective symptom that we are so used to that some of the data doesn't transmit. And so we feel more separate. And transcending that separation into, that's why I called it interdependence, that we are actually much more connected, but sometimes we don't feel that connected. We feel more separate. but there's amazing data flow. And so attunement is to be able to tap into that data flow and to increase our capacity to perceive. And I think that's an amazing territory and can be refined, I think, our whole life long.
Yeah. It's such a powerful experience, to think about that kind of rapport, that kind of attunement. And you're talking about it in a therapeutic setting and an interpersonal communication setting. But my mind is also going to the energetic loop between a speaker and the audience, between a performer and the audience, I've been doing a lot of research on Martin Luther King in recent years, and in the Black church tradition, there's very much this energetic exchange between the preacher and the audience. And so the audience is energizing the preacher is exacerbating the audience, and they're in this kind of dynamic exchange of energy, which is a fundamental concept in African worldview and spirituality and ritual. Is the call response and the energetic interconnectedness of all the participants. Let's talk a little bit about this term transparent communication, and then we'll dig more into trauma and interdependence. But what does transparent communication mean?
Yeah, first of all, I want just back to what you just said. Like, I love what you just said, and I think exactly when we stand in front of an audience and our perception is open, then whatever we talk about has a very different data transmission than when we are a bit scared to speak and we disown our fear. So as long as I can stay vulnerable and open, so I can include my fear. But if I disown it and I kind of put a defense in place, then that becomes a barrier, and everything I say is being run through, gets a spin through that barrier, and then it creates an effect in the audience, and that's a beautiful way to then transcribe it. And that transparent communication is basically built on that. It's like that communication means that I feel myself, obviously, that I have a good experience of my interior experience. So what's going on in me right now? Then what's going on between us, in the space between us? Is that an open space? Is that a bit more distant space? What happens in the space between us? There's not just air, there's a lot of data. And then that I'm attuned to what's happening for you, and also how the communication lands, how your words land in me, how my words land in you, and how we create a loop, kind of an electricity circuit of flow of data. And the deeper that goes, the more inspiring, the deeper, the more intimate, all the levels our conversation will become. And the more distant that is, so it lowers in a way the capacity of innovation, intimacy, understanding. It brings out more conflicts, up to, we see it in the world, to all kinds of war situations when the communication has such a gap that we don't hear each other. It's like there's a storm between us. And so transparent communication is a training where we say, there are many people that sit in caves or monasteries, or some people at least, and that's their spiritual practice, and that's amazing. But not most of the people that listen to us now are not sitting in a cave in the Tibetan, I don't know, Himalayan mountains. And so it means if I want to make relationship and relating and being in society and being societally impactful, then relationship can actually become an amazing medium for contemplation and meditation. So it's kind of a constant mindfulness practice. And like that, I think we simply improve the way we live with each other if we make that a practice. And it doesn't mean that it's always easy, and it's not supposed to be always easy. It doesn't mean it should be easy. It's a commitment to a practice, to a mindfulness practice. And transparent communication has lots of exercises and has a lot of practices how to turn our day into a contemplative practice, so to speak, and harvest the fruits over time that gives us.
Great. Let's delve into this subject that's so central to your work, the subject of trauma. And let me just read a couple of things here. You know, the first sentence of the book is, "We live in stark times." We live in stark times. And on the first page, you go through a litany of the social, personal, economic, political, ecological crises, one of which you list as mounting political authoritarianism, which is something I'm very concerned about here in the United States, particularly, but also in other places. And then you kind of summarize this litany of all these challenges we face: economic, political, ecological, social, personal, with this sentence: "Traumatized persons haunt traumatized landscapes." I just, the word for that is stark too. Like you said in the first sentence of the book, we live in stark times. But I think that's such a powerful and stark and poignant and compelling image of traumatized persons haunting traumatized landscapes. And there's one other thing I wanted to mention. So say a little bit about this idea of trauma and collective trauma. How would you frame that for our listeners here today?
Yeah, to keep it short and succinct. So we could say trauma as the response to overwhelming situations that we cannot process in the moment that they happen, lead to like an internal fragmentation. So the nervous system knows how to, when there's extreme overload or stress, how to shut down a part of that stress to survive better. So we create, in that moment, we create two. There's a lot of stress, there's some numbing or absencing going on, there's a fragmentation. From that moment, what I would call the question and the answer get split. So we become a walking question. There's a topic in our life that we can't resolve easily. And it's, should I do this? Should I do that? Is that right? Is that right? How, like there is a question. And of course, it's an unconscious question, but there is a question in our life. And so, and the second way to speak about trauma that's very important is in the traumatic moment, life says, here in space and time, it's not good for me. I think that's very important. Here in space and time, it's not good for me. A child that gets abused, somebody that experienced violence or racism, or like here, it's very difficult. So not being here and not being now is actually intelligent. And there's a lot of quest for presence, also in many spiritual traditions. But I think without understanding that trauma says intelligently, so here it's not good for me. So splitting space and time is intelligent. And to learn how to work with that intelligence and not to see that as an enemy is key. I believe every defense mechanism of every human being is an intelligent function that was better than without it. And once I understand that, I see, well, everything that happens in our internal process is not either a strength or a weakness. Everything is intelligence. We just need to learn to listen to it and make that intelligence our friend. And so when we go deeper, we could say, okay, that's individually so, but there is our ancestors and our intergenerational transmission of trauma has an effect on us. It's not just the past, it's something that lives in me. It lives in my cells, in my epigenetics. It lives in the way how I experience my emotions, how I experience my body, how I'm thinking about life. And in the collective, it's the same, that we all have been born into a world that was already traumatized to a certain extent when we came in. every one of us came into a world that was partly integrated and partly hurt. And so we grew up in trauma symptoms as life. This is life. So we normalized part of those symptoms as, oh, that's how it is. Politicians talk like this. Parents talk like this. Teachers talk like this, or live like this, or behave like that. And so detoxing our own experience and say, wow, when somebody is hurt and walks around with a big wound, we need to say, listen, you can walk around with that big wound, that's your free choice. But all the life-threatening inflammations, we need to say, listen, this is a wound. And then you can get treatment. So the normalized aspect of trauma that is so normal to us because it conditioned me or it conditioned us, once we say, oh no, that part of our society, this is a result, these are repetitive patterns that are non-emergent, they are disrelated, they keep repeating, we are doing the same thing over and over again, we're having the same conversations over and over again. Instead of having it another time, let's stop for a moment and say, we heard that already 20 times and nothing changed. So why do we try again? So let's make some space and say, what's actually happening here? So there are other parts of life, they keep updating themselves. And we all know this in ourselves. There are parts of us that are growing all the time. It feels fresh, new. I have new ideas. I'm innovative. I'm creative. I'm related. It's warm. It's open. And seeing that collective trauma is a societal design factor. It designs part of our societies. It designs part of our organizations. It designs part of the way we live together. In states, in communities, globally. And as long as we don't see that design factor more and more and more, because we are collectively blind to it in certain ways, and that's not good or bad. That's just, I think, what it means to be born in this life. And as C.G. Jung spoke about the collective unconscious, we are not aware of certain aspects. That's why we keep repeating them. And so I think if we first, before we say, oh, okay, what should I do with that? We kill the question with an attempt to answer it before we even gave birth to the question fully. And so we need the question, we need to sit with that question so that it can come more into our vision. And then we will find ways how to deal with it. And of course, we have already some of it, but we need more collective awareness building. And I think the systemic level of trauma creates so many normalized symptoms in our societies that we really need a different approach to change certain pain points that we have, I think, including climate change and many other big issues, recurrent wars, as we can see right now. Yeah.
This is so powerful and important. And I want to keep going a little bit more on this concept of collective trauma. And you've done events around the world, and in the last decade, you've been focused on, quote, processing the mass traumatization brought about by racism, oppression, colonialism, genocide, gender violence, the climate crisis, and other historic and contemporary challenges. This is, I'm fascinated by this because, some of my interests have been, looking at oppression, looking at social movements, looking at liberation movements, looking at issues of white supremacy, patriarchy, colonialism, human-centeredness. So I'm totally intrigued and curious about like what this work looks like, what this process looks like, what some of these events look like. How are you dealing with mass traumatization, processing this mass traumatization brought about by racism, oppression, colonialism, etc.?
Yeah, there are multiple layers. There's our way of living, obviously, like how we as individuals are aware of these topics, how we as individuals raise our awareness by ourselves through our self-motivation. I want to learn about this. I wanna expand. Once I get to see, wow, yes, that's happening. So what can I learn? Of course. And how can I not only learn it also intellectually, but also as a human being in my embodied way of living? And so there's a self-exploration, and there's also like a social impact process of the individual. But then when we do this, what I call in my first book, the CTIP, the collective trauma integration process, when we come together, and often we have very large groups, as you just said, we come together and we create like a safe space with each other, like a resourced, relational, safe space. Usually we have big therapist teams with us. And then when we come together and we relate with each other, we're actually creating a vessel, like a cup. We are creating a vessel. When that vessel is safe enough and strong enough, the nervous systems in the room start to detox material by themselves. Because the nervous, like our body wants to heal. Our body knows that holding the trauma inside is like has a high cost. It's an intelligent process to protect myself, but if it stays chronic and if I walk around decades with the trauma, I spend a lot of my energy on keeping it that way. And it creates some symptoms in my life. So in the moment it feels safe enough, we detox trauma together. And so what I've seen is when we have these relational fields, it's almost like a magic pond where information starts to surface that is part of this collective field. It doesn't matter if we do it in Germany, if we do it in Argentina, if we do it in the US, in China, everywhere. There's a different collective information. And so a mix between personal and collective information starts to arise. And so as that starts to happen, we facilitate the process so that we can step by step integrate what comes up. And what we integrate creates more soil, creates a bigger cup. When we have a safer cup, more information comes up. And we integrate that. So as we go through waves of that process, until we feel, okay, that's what we can do in this collective field in the given time and in the given competences in the room, but there is some kind of clearing mechanism happening for the individual, and we surface material from that collective field, and that creates a lot of learning for everybody in the room and a lot of recognition that is not just that is also intellectual, but it is much deeper, that is embodied, that is an embodied learning process, which includes our ancestors, obviously, because many of our ancestors are part of the issues that we are working on today. And the other part is we are also working on developing, okay, how can a deeper systemic trauma understanding influence policies? How can that influence how we operate as governments in different countries, and try to influence certain recurrent pain points in a different way through understanding systemic trauma? So there are different dimensions of how that understanding can influence our societies. And I think we need to make use of all of them, including also what we do if organizations either had trauma as the organization or created trauma in the environment, so that we work with that. And environment is not just, as you said before, beautifully human-centric, it's ecosystemic, which means it includes nature, it includes the whole ecosystem, because that's also part of the trauma landscape. And so also for, I think if many of the bigger organizations that had some traumatic impact, either on the biosphere and the human environment, the social environment, there's a lot of pioneering work to be done to restore that and grow together into a new level of development. Because every trauma that gets integrated becomes post-traumatic learning and development. And also ethical upgrades, because at the end of the day, it's about the trauma that is stored, but it's about the ethical transgression that was there to start with to create that trauma. And that ethical transgression needs to be integrated for us to upgrade our ethical understanding to deal with the new innovations, AI or nanotechnology or any kind of other science breakthroughs. We need that ethical growth, but some of it is frozen in the permafrost of our cultures. And so as long as we don't harvest that learning, that's why I often say innovation is not just coming from the future. Innovation is the learning that we've never had. And from
Nice.
that's frozen in the ice of the past. So that's why we need both streams of innovation. Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love that. And that's a good segue into the last topic. I mean, there's several other questions that I would love to ask, and we may get a chance to, but there's one more topic that I definitely want to make sure we hit before we open it up to questions from the group. And that topic is interdependence, right? And interdependence is right here in the subtitle of the book, Practicing Interdependence to Heal Our Trauma and Our World. And this has been a particular interest of mine, so I just want to share a couple of quotes. And I love what you just, one of the last things you said, where you're talking about innovation is the learnings from the past that we haven't learned yet, or that we haven't integrated yet. And that's been some of my scholarly project has been looking at the ways that people in the past were talking about interconnectedness. You know, it's not just us or, you know, James Lovelock in 1965, you know, coming up with the Gaia hypothesis. It's people have been talking, you know, interconnectedness, interrelatedness, interdependence, mutuality, participation. These are core themes in most, you know, cultures, most mystical and spiritual traditions. And so let me just read a couple of examples. Bell Hooks writes, spiritual life is first and foremost about commitment to a way of thinking and behaving that honors principles of interbeing and interconnectedness. So that's Bell Hooks in 2001. Martin Luther King in 1954, the universe is indeed a unity, a oneness. Mohandas Gandhi, I believe in the essential unity of man, and for that matter, of all that lives. Gandhi writes, underlying ahimsa or nonviolence is the unity of all life. Just a couple more examples. Existence in relation sums up the African conception of life and reality. Existence in relation sums up the African conception of life and reality. Patricia Hill Collins writes, the words and actions of Black women intellectuals from different historical times and addressing markedly different audiences resonate with a strikingly similar theme of the oneness of all human life. Here's a Black woman intellectual like Patricia Hill Collins is referencing, but here's a woman from the 19th century, Anna Julia Cooper, who writes, we take our stand on the solidarity of humanity, the oneness of life, and the unnaturalness and injustice of all special favoritisms, whether of sex, race, country, or condition. Just a couple more, and then I'll wrap up. Here's a radical feminist from 1974, Jane Alpert writes, feminism concerns more than political power, essential as that is. It is closely tied to theories of awakening consciousness, of creation and rebirth, and of the essential oneness of the universe. That's 1974. Here's the scholar and theologian Catherine Keller in 1986 writes, feminist sensibility affirms the quest for connection. The intuitive trust in interrelatedness seems to function as the first principle of much feminist reflection. So I just think, I mean, you know, we could go on, and there's, you know, been a certain scholarly influence in this idea of interconnectedness. So we see terms like the oneness hypothesis, radical relationality, relational ontology, relational epistemology, the kinship worldview, animism, new animism, pantheism, panentheism, process thought, deep ecology, new ecology, the ecological self, ontologies of entanglement, planetary entanglement, the biotic community, the beloved community, Gaia, the noosphere, existential togetherness. So the point I'm trying to make is that in all of these, in, you know, so many different traditions and so many different time periods, we have intellectuals, freedom fighters, liberation activists, spiritual people, preachers, mystics, emphasizing over and over and over again these themes of interrelatedness, interconnectedness, whether it's Hildegard of Bingen talking about, everything is interpenetrated and interrelated, or it's, today's scholars talking about ontologies of entanglement. We see this theme of interdependence again and again, and it's a core theme in this book. So tell us about your approach to interdependence and why you think it's important and why is it relevant in our personal and collective lives.
Yeah. So first of all, it's so beautiful to listen to these quotes. They're amazing, and at least what I have learned over, I don't know, 20 some years of seeing thousands and thousands of people going through these processes in small or large events. I think especially Western notion that is so hyper individualized at times is putting the individual into a box, which is a confusion of individuation and separation. I think the separation dimension, individuation is great. The separation dimension is an effect of systemic trauma. And so there's a mix, and some schools of thought kind of perpetuated that kind of split or that mix. And so when we look at, we even say things like, because I think trauma is deeply encoded in language, and so there's what I call the language of separation, and that has a certain grammar. That's how we speak. And then there is a language of transformation. A language of transformation is deeply interested in the representation of the actual process that's happening. And is kind of intimate with the process. It doesn't matter if the process is pleasant or not pleasant, if it works or if it doesn't work, because if something doesn't work, something works that it doesn't work. So like we always interested to stay in touch, like a surfer on a wave. And I think good process work, individually or collect or in groups, is to get the wave, what's happening. I often say in my groups, if I find myself thinking about what's next in a group process, I know I missed something. Because when you are in it, you are not thinking, it's like it's a flow. It's an emergent process. Even if the process is stagnant and we are present with the stagnation, that's what it is. It's the process. And so when we come back to the interdependence, so as individuals, we are not part of the ecosystem, I believe. We are the ecosystem. When you go through the forest, and I ask you, so okay, where is nature? Well, nature is not just around me, because this is also nature. So nature is through us, not around us. And society is also not all the other people, or so I'm surrounded by society, I'm also society. So society is through us. So the biosphere or the ecosystem is all of us, it's through us, but that's often not how we experience life. And I would argue that's not because we are individuated, that's because we feel separate and we carry elements, layers of trauma, individual, ancestral, and collective trauma encoded in our experience. And so that's what I think is the limitation also sometimes of the psychotherapeutic process. It doesn't, the landscape is not big enough. And sometimes we get confused if the landscape is too big, but sometimes we cannot resolve certain things when we're too much hypnotized by the individual, when the individual is too close and separate. And so that I am individual, yes, and I am the ecosystem, yes, and that's the principle of interdependence. That's I'm plugged into a data flow, a data network that we call the biosphere. And that even when we listen to the dualism between the human sphere, the human experience, and nature, there is often a kind of a dualism, because the trauma hurts the data flow that you see, wow, my ancestors are actually roots into the planet. My body is the planet. It's not is on the planet. My body is the planet. And so the more we are in a regulated way dropping deeper through different layers of trauma, it actually opens up more and more into a fluidity that is like a data flow. And so nature is not anymore other, but we are nature. And we are plugged into the intelligent network of nature. And so and up to very profound spiritual dimensions, let's say, and that gives us a much more intimate experience of life, and a much more present and attuned experience of life. And let's imagine distancing, because many people, when they say they are triggered, what they mean is, okay, they get a rush of stress, they get maybe angry or scared, and so it's a stressful part of the trigger. But the other side of being triggered is becoming a bit more distant, becoming more indifferent, becoming checked out. And so there's a lot of checked outness in how we approach collective topics at the moment. There's a lot of hyperactivation, which is different. So climate urgency, there is something urgent, but trauma stress is not climate urgency. These are two different things. And then we see a lot of indifference. That indifference is trauma in the other form. So absence and indifference are trauma symptoms. So when we see how many people carry distancing, either I feel distant to certain parts of my body, certain emotions, certain people in society. So there is a lot of distancing going on. So it means we are lacking collective intimacy. And I think that collective intimacy is something we really need in order to solve globally and come to a different level of global collaboration. And so that's why I believe in like interdependence is such an important, deeper, embodied understanding of life that we need to accelerate the way we collectively heal and we collectively collaborate. So I think same as the quotes that you read, I think that they're super important for, especially also for social impact work, for political work, for climate activism, for social or racial justice. We need that interdependence.
Yeah, powerfully stated. And one of the reasons why I, became interested in interdependence was because I was trying to articulate, I mean, this is 25 years ago, but I was I was interested in racial justice, social justice. I was interested in environmental issues, the ecological crisis, and it's obvious to a lot of people now. It was a little less obvious 25 years ago, but there were certainly people at that time and people long before who were saying these are not separate issues. These are not separate crises ultimately, and we need to recognize and address them as parts of a multivalent crisis. And so I was looking for ways to articulate the connections between ecology and social justice and cosmology. And so I began, and to me, it was just very clear that there were deep, deep connections and that these were fundamentally interconnected, but it's harder to articulate what that is. So I began thinking about how do you break this down into simple language? And what are some of the deep principles that flow underneath, in between, through, connect ecology, social justice, and cosmology or worldview. And some of the principles that I eventually came to were like personhood, in terms of deep reverence and respect for every individual being, not just the human person, but every articulated individual being in the cosmos. That kind of regard for the cosmic personhood of every being, every ecosystem, every raindrop, every atom, every entity, every individual. So personhood is a deep principle that connects ecology and social justice. Also think of community as a deep principle that connects ecology and social justice. and interconnectedness, which in some ways is another way of saying community. But I think of interconnectedness as a deep principle that connects ecology, social justice, and cosmology. I remember saying, the connection is connection. What's the connection between ecology and social justice? The connection is connection, or the connection is interconnection. It is interconnectedness. So I just think it's really interesting and inspiring to see how you're working with this idea in terms of both our collective political global crises and, you know, our individual communion with ourselves and with others. Let's turn to the Q&A here, see what we got going on. Okay. Jody Lee asks, can we cultivate our attunement in solitary practice, or is it only cultivated in relationships?
Yes, of course. I mean, definitely we can cultivate attunement all the time, because the more we cultivate attunement, we see that information is omnipresent, which means every inch of the universe contains the entire information of the universe. That's also the principle of interdependence, is also like we are the supercomputer. It's not we need to go to the supercomputer to take the data from the supercomputer and put it on our separate laptops. I often say humanity is like a supercomputer that animated laptops and identified too much with the laptops and forgot the nature of the supercomputer. So we are operating like separate laptops. And so attunement, when I walk through nature, even when I sit in meditation, like attunement can be practiced all the time. It's like my nervous system is like an antenna, and everywhere I put my intention and attention, I begin to resonate with and to listen to the language of resonance and refine that listening from the spiritual dimension to the interpersonal dimension to the intrapersonal dimension to the ancestral dimension, the ecosystemic dimension. It works everywhere. The only thing I think is good to look is sometimes it's easier to stay in my own sphere because a lot of trauma has happened in relationship. And so if my trauma happened in relationship, then at a certain point in my development, I will have to open myself up and practice attunement in relationship for me to get a deeper access to my own healing, if that's the point. So if it's a bypass, we need to look at it. But if it's part of my spiritual practice, attunement is possible all the time. I think it's a deep sense of presencing, listening, and being respectful towards everything that exists, basically, as you said beautifully before. True. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Maria has a question that says, how can I create places where people can listen and understand each other, even though all of their collective trauma is unsolvably intertwined?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. It starts always like if we want to do something for other people, it's our calling to live it. And that's beautiful because you're asking a very beautiful question. Because when the nature of trauma is here and now in space and time, life is not good for me. And we split space-time. So we are either hanging out in the past or in a kind of imaginary future, which is different from the innovative future, which is a result of presence. Future is always being born now, but the split of past and future is a trauma symptom, same as it's somewhere else, it's not here. And so when we know that, then we say, wow, our trauma healing is that we become an ally of life more and more and more. And this means as it's appropriate, because it's not about overloading myself with trauma content. It means that I can deeply enjoy life. I can deeply enjoy the beauty of life. And it's an embodied quality. At the same time, I'm willing to rest in the discomfort that it creates to be in a space, for example. Every mediator or conflict, everybody who works in conflict resolution, our ability is to be in spaces and the discomfort of conflict and not reject the conflict and the discomfort, but to work with it. That's extremely powerful. So it's actually, wow, I see, even the spiritual journey is not getting somewhere, but it's more coming here. Trauma means, or collective trauma means we left life. And healing means we become an ally of life. And we are willing to dive, as it's appropriate, into the deeper and deeper collective wounds where we are able to dwell. We want to be there. And that's the power that creates the healing space. I've been over and over and over again with groups and big groups in the place where we could feel here. We could literally feel here's the end of the conscious universe. Here's the end of our perception. Here is a void. The collective defense mechanism against pain that has been created in different societies. Like, for example, when we take the Holocaust, we have been in places where, millions of people in concentration camps cannot feel the experience. Racism, like 400 years of racism, there's a lot of pain. So there's a reason why that doesn't come up and flood millions of people now. So when we come closer to that, we reach that mechanism, the collective suppression mechanism, is the end of where our conscious universe ends. That's we cannot look beyond it. And so being able to step by step dwell in that place consciously is amazingly powerful. And that willingness to be there is more important than the willingness to solve it, because often the solving is the way to avoid being there. And so, but that needs a lot of capacity building. That's not just easy what I'm saying now, but it's an amazingly powerful process. And the more we want to hold space for people to be able to alchemize and turn the pain into soil, because what we ultimately want is to heal the land. I often say, when we heal our inner land, we don't fight over outer land. But when our inner land is hurt, we cannot live together on the land. That doesn't work. So we turn pain, the pain of our ancestors, our own pain, into soil. And so the soil can stay fertile. And so physical healing, the trauma that gets healed in the physical body, in the emotions, in the nervous system, creates soil and water. The emotion creates fertile soil. And that's where new innovations can land and sprout in a good way, ethically sound. And I think that's what we need to ask ourselves, like, am I willing to go deeper and deeper? And that's my prayer. I'm living that deepening as my prayer as I walk through life. And then holding spaces is a consequence of that inner intention that I carry. And I think then we can create very, very powerful transformational vessels where the collective pain can grow and turn into soil. And then it becomes the fertile soil for new ways of societies, new ways of living together.
It's such a profound and promising process and deep process that you're talking about. I kind of want to take a step back maybe and say, well, I'm thinking about kind of the political situation we're here in the US, and it's too much to really delve into. But one of the ways that I think about it, and that it's been talked about, is that we're in an epistemological crisis. We're in a crisis about how we know things. We can't agree on basic reality. I mean, it's kind of how it feels in the last 5, 6, 7 years in the US. There's a famous political quote that says, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own set of facts. Uh, and it's like now it's like we've gone past your own opinion and your own set of facts to like people feel entitled to their own reality. And we have this kind of, I'll just give a couple examples. I mean, for instance, we have these arguments over the history of racism, in the United States. And we have, certain school boards and certain state legislatures that are, removing books about Martin Luther King Jr. from the library, removing books about Rosa Parks or about Ruby Bridges, who was a tiny little first grader who integrated the schools in New Orleans in 1960. So we have like just basic disagreements about the ontological reality of history, and what has happened. Or, one other example, the Washington Post reported that when President Trump was in office, that he said in the 4 years he was in office, he made 30,573 false or misleading statements. That averages out to 20 a day. So it's just this kind of, and this fits very much with his political advisor, Steve Bannon's strategy, which he called just flood the zone with garbage. He used a more earthy term than garbage. We said just flood the zone with garbage. They can't keep up, with one lie after another one lie, And so without litigating all of, these kind of partisan squabbles or whatever, how would you as a therapist, as a healer, as someone who's facilitating this deep collective trauma work in groups, how do you deal with a situation where people have just basic epistemological, different realities? So people are living in different bubbles and can't even seem to agree on basic facts of history or political reality these days.
Yeah, first of all, we want to first state that creates a lot of pain. So let's put this first into the room. That's everything I'm gonna say afterwards, because it sounds like a bit of an explanation, but this creates a lot of pain. Not respecting the true facts of history is always painful, because it's deeply disrespectful to all the pain and the trauma that has been created. Instead of owning it, we disown it more. So that is very painful. Let's have this in the room. There are consequences to this. And I think you described multiple things. What I hear, and of course, what I also see, and that also, by the way, I think applies to technology, internet, social media, and so what I'm going to say now. The fact that trauma always creates disembodied areas. Let's say, imagine there is a city at night, and you are on the plane, and you see the city. First time I went to Kathmandu, because they turn off the electricity in quarters of the city, because there's not enough money for electricity. I sat on the plane and said, wow, that's genius. That I looked down and I saw, wow, I cannot tell you if this black spot of where I think Kathmandu is supposed to be is a forest, is a lake, is a part of the city without light, because there's no light. So when there is trauma, there's a part of the nervous system that goes, no light. That experience doesn't arise in the self as information. But it doesn't mean that in that part of the city, people are sitting with candles or small lamps in their houses. So life is happening, but the electricity is gone. And so the collective body has a big data issue. There's a big unawareness, the narrative. When we talk about the historical narrative is the intellectual narrative, is the emotional narrative, is the physical narrative, is the ancestral narrative, is the spiritual narrative, is the relational narrative. All of that is narrative. So when part of the narrative is like a newspaper, you take and you cut it into pieces and you throw it into the room. So trauma healing is that the narrative starts to cohere again into a coherent narrative. But for us to do that, we need to go through a healing process. Otherwise, the centrifugal power of trauma is stronger than the cohering power. And so if we as societies don't want to look at our wounds, which some of us will try definitely not to do, because it's very painful and it means radical consequences for the societal architecture. So because once we start to say yes to the deeper revelations, our societal fabric will have to change. And there are defense mechanisms against it. And so that's why I think we need to speed up collective healing, because that's the way how to embody again the narrative of humanity, and that we can see that even and what I'm saying now is maybe that sounds a bit far out scientifically now, but I'm sure that it's true, is that our organs in our body are connected to that planetary system. We are not separate from that. My body is planetary, is part of the planet. And so that the big wounds that we have in our societies do not allow us to be healthy. We have to produce health symptoms because we are living in unhealthy ecosystems. And so the imperative is actually to say, wow, we have to heal also collectively to be more healthy individually. And so that coheres the narrative. And otherwise, fake news, disregarding the narrative, disrespecting history, these are going to be symptoms. And the more technology amplifies those symptoms, every new level of technology will just make the game board bigger and more confusing. And so we have to get that embodied. And as I think also that the internet, what the technology we are using right now, when we are deeply attuned to each other, when my body feels your body, even if you're sitting thousands of miles away from me, then we begin to ground the virtual space through our embodiment, and we use technology in a very embodied way. And I think also the cultural healing is needed, because otherwise the denial of the past, which is the denial of the pain of the past, will inevitably in a part of the population create those kind of symptoms. And that's, I think, a deep, for me, a very, I don't know, obvious symptom that we are going through, that we really have to tend to and look at, okay, how can we do the work that we can more and more embody? And then from a certain level of acceleration of the collective healing, I think those symptoms will start to decrease. But it's not going to decrease immediately, because we need to gain some momentum. And that is not just an intellectual understanding. That means that we need to go through the process, and that process is also has to be uncomfortable, because a lot of transgressions happened. So we need to be willing to be with that together. But we can do it. We can do it. And it's inevitable, I think. There's no way out. Otherwise, we are saying things like, let's go to Mars, the planet is toast. So then we become a cosmic virus, because we will recreate the same thing, but then Mars will be toast after some time, and then we try to go. So we cannot go away from the destroyed ecosystem. We need to heal it, and then space travel is great, because it's not away from the disaster. It's an expansion of life. And yeah, so we have to heal the ecosystem, and that's our evolution.
Fantastic, powerful stuff. I think we're about ready to kind of head toward our conclusion. Is there any final thoughts or a final statement that you want to share with our collective here?
Yeah, first of all, that I deeply enjoy our conversation. I enjoy the depth of your exploration. It's beautiful to listen to you. It's also beautiful to hear how deeply you, I don't know, you read the book and you reflected throughout your work on life. So it's beautiful to be sitting here with you. Thank you for that, for the time. And also, I want to say thank you to CIIS for hosting us and being interested in this conversation. So thank you, everybody who made that possible. And I wanna just say this. For me, what's deeply touching is that our allyship with life and the capacity to not be hypnotized by where we are going, but be true to the process we are walking. The Tao Te Ching has the translation of Stephen Mitchell has a lovely sentence. It says, a journey of 1,000 miles starts from beneath your feet. Trying to be more developed than we are is often a symptom of fear, and we cannot walk away from in 100 meters. We can only walk from where we are. And that owning, or some people say, I still have that pattern. I'm working on this already for many years. It's still like it's almost not there. Instead of saying, yes, this is part of my life. And I'm walking this. I am walking this. That's not an obstacle. That's part of my revelation. Walking whatever is in my life is part of my revelation. And I think if we can come more and more to, yes, I want to walk this life. My purpose doesn't start when I'm fully healed. My healing is part of my purpose. And so that creates a beautiful kind of humility towards life. And I think if we can walk that path and see that there is no obstacle that blocks it, there is only a revelation that wants to be in our life, and we are walking life home as we do that. And I think that's a very beautiful kind of sobering way of living more and more in this world. That spirituality is also a way into the world, not out of the world. It's deeply into it.
Mm, mm. So take that in. It's a beautiful statement. One of my favorite quotes from Mitchell's translation of the Tao Te Ching is, humility means trusting the Tao. Humility means trusting the Tao, thus never needing to be defensive. Humility means trusting the Tao, thus never needing to be defensive. And I feel that sense from your work, that you are facing these deep personal and collective traumas in your work right there, dealing with people and communities who have lived through some of the most horrific experiences, and that you're held in that work by your deep connection to your own inner presence and authenticity, to your connection to spirit, to the planet, to the cosmos, to our interrelatedness on all these different levels. And so I thank you for your words. I thank you for the heart and the intelligence and the presence that you're bringing to this work and to our world. And on behalf of CI, I also want to thank CIIS Public Programs. Thank all of you for being here. And with that, I'll thank you, Thomas, one more time, and sign off and say thanks so much to everybody. And it was a real pleasure to be with all of you today. Thank you.
Thank you.